Pet is Amy Renz of Gracious Goodness Pet
Goodness
Foods.
gracious. Yep.
We're
Sorry.
off to a really good start already. No, Goodness Gracious.
We're good.
Yeah, and goodnessgraciousco.com. So I'm going to drop your website in here so folks can check this out. But Amy and I we're on the same wavelength in terms of talking about the impacts of what food does to pets and how it is actually a big part of the chronic disease issue that we're facing these days.
Right.
So, Amy, you are a massive advocate for not only healthier pet foods and pet diets, but also for making sure that pets get great care and are cared for all the way around. And in fact, in your business, 51% of your profits go to advocating for pet care. I mean, that's an amazing gift and generosity. So you're also an advocate for finding homeless pets homes and making sure that all beings are respected. And I think that's just so critical. And I love that you are committed to sustainable practices in your business as well. That's kind of one of the things that bothers me about all of the shipping of stuff across the country is our impact in the environment. So welcome, thank you.
Thank you.
And how did you get started in this stuff, in this crazy
Oh
world
my
of
gosh.
to feed pets?
Right. I was not in it at all. I mean, I grew up with animals, and my sister's a veterinarian. So, they were always in our homes and in our lives. But it wasn't until I got my first, I was running a software company, like not thinking about pet food. And I got my first dog, Grace, in 2007. I got a sister for her, Lula, in 2009. And I think like most new parents, they become committed to the health and well-being of that little body or bodies, right? And that centers around food. And so around 2007, if you recall, there was the melamine issue, right? Where, thousands of animals got sick from purposeful tainting of wheat gluten. And then in 2009, there was the chicken jerky issue, right? Where we still never really got to the bottom of it, but it made a whole lot of animals sick. And about that same time, there was a large pet food manufacturer whose employees got sick from exposure to toxic mold and fumigants. And I was just overwhelmed. I thought, what am I going to feed my kids? And so I turned 4. I'll disclose how old I am. I turned 40, and in 2009, and I started asking myself, who are you helping? And I did not have a good answer. And so I decided that I was going to take a right turn and create this company that focuses on holistic, whole food, species appropriate food for our companion animals, and does something really good in the meantime. Because I had also learned that at that time we were euthanizing about 3 to 5 million companion animals in our country because people failed them. And so I thought if I can do something really good to address this homelessness problem along with food, then that would be that reason for that right turn. And so I created a company that was committed to that purpose. And along the way, it became so much more, right? We are, as you mentioned, focused on making good choices. So that extends to our connection to people and the planet, mindful about where we source our proteins from, no GMOs, less plastic, zero styrofoam, more compostable materials, focusing on diversity and a vibrant culture of inclusion inside of our own company. And of course, that charitable give back to community animal causes. So that's kind of how we came to be.
Wow. It's like you're hitting all of the things that are important for really helping us move our society, move our world forward into one that's geared towards supporting the inhabitants and not the corporate culture that's been sort of running the show. So yeah, right on for that. One of the things I love about what you're doing is that you're talking about metabolic syndrome, which is like that is where the whole focus on human healthcare is right now. So
It is.
explain what that is for folks that aren't familiar with that concept.
Sure, sure. So metabolic syndrome is this vicious cycle of chronic disease that fuels more chronic disease, right? So you can come into it at a number of different places, but essentially the core elements of it are being overweight, right? And it puts you at high risk for diabetes, obesity, which is a chronic disease, heart disease, non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, which puts you at risk for cancer. It puts you at risk for a whole bunch of things that other diseases that can lead to cancer. So the key indicators of metabolic syndrome would be excess body fat, particularly around the middle, high blood pressure, high triglycerides, abnormal cholesterol levels, and what happens is that these things create insulin resistance. So insulin is that hormone in your body responsible for lowering blood sugar, and when you have resistance, then the cells in your body don't take up sugar as they should, right? So it would normally kind of get stored in your liver and in your muscles, but when it doesn't, you have this high blood sugar. So high blood sugar damages blood vessels, and it damages the blood vessels throughout your whole body. So it damages the blood vessels around your heart, and you have heart disease. It damages the blood vessels that feed your kidneys and the little nephrons, the filters in your kidneys. So you get kidney disease. It damages the blood vessels that bring nutrients to your nerves. And so you start to see neuropathy. It damages the blood vessels in your brain. So you start to see cognition, behavioral, mood disorders. And then when you have all this excess blood sugar, it starts to get stored as fat. So now you become more overweight, right? And then it
Right.
also turns out that the more overweight you are, the more fat is an end. It's not just this little food bank that's holds calories for for a rainy day, right? It's an endocrine organ. It's responsible for firing off a whole boatload of things, and those things can cause inflammation. And so the larger you are, the more overweight you are, the more of these inflammatory substances you have floating around in your body that fuel that whole problem. And one of those things contributes to leaky gut. So now we've got a gut that's more porous than it should be. We have toxins leaking out of our gut into our bloodstream, fueling all of this inflammation. And ultra processed diets, to put a really sharp point on it, are at the center of this problem, right? They are
Right on.
not species appropriate. They are loaded
For
with
anybody.
carbs. They're loaded with heat-induced toxicants. They're glyphosate, aflatoxin, all kinds of naturally occurring toxins are in them, and they, if you can do one thing, feed real food, right? Or as much real food as you can.
Amen to that. Yeah. And that's it. I mean, it's like there's three vicious cycles that tie into all of that. And while we don't have the heart disease component in our, everything else you just mentioned applies completely. And so this is when we're talking to their patients about them being like pre-diabetic, and that's what's happening with our dogs and cats as well. So right on. And it's just it's just so frustrating because parents aren't aware of it. And sadly, most veterinarians can't see when a pet is overweight. Like they'll see a Labrador that's 70 pounds, and because the number sort of matches up with the breed, they'll say, oh, super. But in reality, many of those dogs are already 25 or 30% overweight or
Right.
obese at that point. And that's where, especially for the breeds that are predisposed to cancer and other diseases of chronic inflammation, if you've got more fat, you're storing more inflammatory molecules in those fat cells. So every time squished, or you add more fat on, then more of those inflammatory molecules are released into circulation. So,
Right.
yeah,
Yeah.
crazy stuff.
The Association for Pet Obesity Prevention came out recently with their new statistics, and 59% of dogs and 61% of cats are considered overweight or obese. And that's scary. But to me, some of the scarier things were that about a third of pet parents look at that body condition, right? So kind of middle on the scale of, 1 to 9, kind of middle of the road, 5 being normal. So you've got a dog or a cat in that 6 to 9 upper range, right? So overweight, obese. They look at that animal as being normal or maybe a little too thin.
It's because parents can't see that their pets weight, and sometimes they can't see that they're underweight too when they actually do start dropping weight.
Right.
They're saying things like, "Oh my God, he's trying to eat everything." It's not nailed down, but and as I mentioned, many of my colleagues are
That's
not
obesity too, right?
recognizing that pets are obese. No, he's good. But this is it. I mean, this is where all chronic disease starts, and there's more information coming out every day that the longer that goes on in a pet or a person's life, the more complications they will have later in life. So it's so critical to start real food nutrition right from the get-go. So at this puppy, don't start it on the kibble that the breeder said you should feed forever and ever. Start incorporating real food into that puppy's diet, because changing what they're eating at that juncture will set them up for the most healthy and successful life going forward.
Exactly. Amen. Amen to that.
So, I mean, it's just, so what you've got your company is really cool, and I'm going to share screen and so we.
I think it stalled. Oh.
So, you know about how you got started that, or talk to it a little bit, but I mean, this is great because cats, even though they're actually the species that probably should eat, most of them are like not so much.
Yeah.
So I'm really happy that you're doing this for these guys. But
yeah. So
please.
it skipped out for a little bit there. So was there a question, Ruth, you wanted me to or
No,
just talk about our food?
Or? Yeah. There we go. So I'm so pleased that you've done this for both dogs and cats. But for folks that are just getting started into this way of life of feeding real food for their cats, how would you suggest to them to get started into it? How, we've got this bowl of dry stuff on the floor. Where do you go from there?
Right. So I think a lot of times for people, once they kind of realize that, oh gosh, I know I shouldn't be eating ultra processed foods and I should eat real food. And they apply now, that kind of a light bulb goes on, and they realize that I should be feeding my pet that way. Then ultimately, I think a lot of times it comes down to a budgetary choice, right? Because we've been ingrained for so long to think that, oh yeah, kibble is what I should be feeding. And oh gosh, it's so affordable, right? And so it's really placing as much of that. I'll jump back to something I was going to say in a second, but it's really about replacing as much of that kibble with real food as you can afford, right? And I don't really find, or at least we haven't found in our practice, that we have to slowly wean dogs or cats from kibble to real food. I mean, real food is just so amazing that they can just make the switch. It's when we see kind of going the other way that we start to see problems. But all bodies are unique, and so I would just say replacing as much of that ultra processed food with real food as you can, starting maybe with 10%. I mean 20%. The dog risk group out of the University of Helsinki has done some really interesting studies in terms of real food and in prenatal and early postnatal diets for puppies, and found that replacing 20% of that ultra processed food with real food can result in a decreased likelihood in atopy, so allergic skin conditions, when those puppies reach adulthood. Um, it's tough to feed real food without synthetics in puppyhood because at least the AFCO nutrient profile doesn't exist in nature, and so you end up having to put in things like calcium and phosphorus synthetics to make it that way. My recommendation is always, okay, you've got to feed puppy food, but then once you get to be an adult, look for an adult formula, because then you can start to get away from these excessive use of synthetics and things, which body does not recognize synthetics the way it recognizes normal
Well, and
dietary nutrients.
yeah, and I take a little different approach. So, for instance, with the crock pet diet, it's balanced for complete and balanced with all life stages. And synthetics maybe aren't optimal, but they do get the job done, and we do have to use them in slightly higher uh, amounts. But if you will use optimally absorbable forms, I think it helps tremendously.
Yeah.
But it's amazing. I mean, one of my coaches is also a breeder for emotional support dogs in Michigan School District. And so she started feeding crock pet to all of her dogs. And the 2 litters that hit the ground after she started feeding this way, she said it was night and day between what her experience was in the past and how these grew and thrived. They had equal weights across the entire litter, and they had far fewer issues with GI problems, all of that good stuff. So, I mean, it's so critical to get young pups and young kittens started right from the get-go.
Right. Right.
Cool.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's part of, I mean, that's where the crock pet diet came out of, was during that melamine scare. It was
Right.
just abundantly clear that we couldn't trust any of these guys in terms of the food manufacturers, because they were actually all getting their stuff made at one place in Kansas.
Right. There was a interesting study that pet food trade associations came out with a few years ago, and they looked at over 1,200 dog foods and over 500 cat foods, which their sampling represented about 90% of the market. And they showed the ingredients that go into those foods. And if you imagine, they broke it up by dog and cat. And if you imagine that those ingredients go into one ginormous bowl that either our dogs or our cats eat out of, I'll start with cats because it was pitiful.
Horrifying.
The number 1 ingredient was corn. Number 2 was corn gluten meal. Number 3 was a rendered chicken product. And number 4 was water. Like, it was more carb than protein in that diet. And
Right.
and the dog food one wasn't a whole lot better. I mean, it was mildly better. It was at least maybe equal parts crude protein and carb. But all in all, 90% of what goes into pet food is corn, soy, or a byproduct of the human food chain, basically a rendered thing. And
Right.
that's
it. Upcycling, right? Upcycling. That's the new catchword.
Yep.
Yeah. So it is, and it's
go ahead.
it's insane because all of this came from World War II, where the government was considering mass euthanasia of pets. And so Mark Morris, who founded Hill's Pet Food Company, came up with an emergency ration of highly processed corn, chicken beaks, and feathers to feed the pets to get them through until the war was over. And it never went away. Oops. Oh, wait, we make a load of money off this stuff. Oh, shoot.
I know. And lifespan is declining, and it's no surprise, right? We're obesity and is tied to lifespan. And if we're getting fatter, ergo, we're not living as long. And I mean, what goes into that bowl now, I think has just, it's become worse, right? I mean, because glyphosate is used everywhere now. In the US, it's about a third of U.S. cropland is treated with glyphosate, and the permissible levels on human food are about 6 times greater than what it is in Europe. And that stuff is it's the killer of the microbiome. Research showed, 13 researchers out of Europe showed in 2021 that the same pathway that it used to kill weeds, it kills that really nice, healthy bacteria in your gut. And
Right
it's
on.
associated with 20 different chronic diseases, 6 different types of cancer. It's there are better
It's
choices.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the few places, the EU is one of the few places where Monsanto finally got themselves slapped because they were doing their whole thing of suing the farmer for having Monsanto
Right.
GMO corn on their property. And the EU said, excuse me, how did that GMO corn get to the EU since it's banned here? So that's the only
Right.
time they've had to back down. But that's the problem is that they developed all of these crops to be resistant to glyphosate, so they could sell you the seed and the glyphosate to keep all. I mean, it's just insanity at its
Bad.
finest. Right on. So
It is.
yeah,
Yeah,
that's a long topic we could keep hammering on, but it's just
I
astonishing
know.
what is allowed to
Right.
be fed in the U.S. So
Yeah.
one of the things we were talking about earlier is metabolic syndrome, but we talk about food in terms of weight control, but exercise is critical, and then also portion control, and then there's folks that we treat every time the dog goes outside to pee. So have you looked much at how to use those things, including maybe some intermittent fasting to help improve?
Yeah, I think intermittent fasting is really fascinating, right? Not only for my pets, but for my own health. And although I have to say, it's really hard not to have my coffee with cream in it in the morning. But I agree. Intermittent fasting does wonders for metabolism, and and exercise helps improve body composition. So the more muscle you have, the higher your metabolism is going to be. It helps reduce stress, which adds to weight gain and that whole vicious cycle. Dogs need to get out, right? I mean, whether or not it's physical or mental enrichment, those things are key to a healthy life. So we always recommend that diet and exercise, diet and exercise, diet and exercise, and feed the dog, not the bowl, right? You see an empty bowl doesn't mean food has to go in it. And if your dog finished up that bowl, doesn't mean you got to put more food in it, right? Because we know that signal between the gut and the brain that says, oh, I'm full, that can get haywired or short circuited too. And
Right.
so,
Right on. Yeah, because I mean, that's one of there's a couple of things that at least have minutes between every meal does. And one of them is that the gut can kick in and do the migrating motor complex where all the excess contents in the small intestine get flushed down, and it gives your blood sugar a chance to normalize a little bit more. If you're eating a treat every 15 minutes, if you're even in humans, if we take like a mint 2 or 3 hours, a day, that's going to kick that whole cycle back up and bring our blood sugar spiking up, and our little bodies get crazy about it. Same thing with our pets. If we're treating them for go and pee, we're upsetting the body's ability to get into homeostasis. And I think there was a study released probably about a year ago now that showed that pets that ate once a day lived longer than everybody else, whether it's feeding twice a day or 3 times a day. So I think that research is pretty clear that the more the body can actually rest and repair, the better off we're going to be. All of us, dogs, cats, and humans.
I agree. I was, there's this interesting dynamic. So we all know what advanced glycation end products are, right? There's those really nasty things that become heat-induced toxicants when you start to overcook things.
Right.
But those things can also be created inside the body, right? So when you have high blood sugar, your body can start to cook up its own advanced glycation end products, and those things are very damaging, especially to your pancreas, right? To the beta cells in your pancreas that are responsible for releasing that insulin. So maintaining or proper blood sugar is so important.
Right on. And it turns out too that that's actually one of the main of chronic kidney disease is AGE, and it's not called age for nothing, right? But
Right.
AGE molecules will end up attacking the basement membrane of the kidney, and that is the little tiny scarring that over time builds up. And I think you could find those things in every at sort of at cause for almost every chronic disease. But that's the beautiful thing about any type of lightly cooking or slow cooking. Using a slow cooker produces the least amount of AGEs or advanced glycosylation end cooking method. The hotter and the faster you go, i.e., extruding kibble, poaching stuff in a can in a factory, that's where the
Right.
most AGEs get produced. So that's
Yep.
an excellent point. Cool.
Yep.
Well,
Yeah.
one of the things we get to meet in real life in the not too distant future in October, and so wanted to at least mention the Feed Real Summit, um,
Right.
which is coming up October 14th in San Diego. We'll drop this link in the comments, but Rodney Habib is going to be our keynote speaker, which is amazing. Angela Arlino, who we both know and love, will be speaking. And then Kay Stewart with the Feed Real group is going to be talking as well. There are still 100 tickets left. It's going to be an awesome event because it will be to meet some really amazing people, increase your knowledge, and really kind of hang out with folks. And I mean, how would it be to meet Rodney, right?
Right. That's going to be great.
Is this the first? Is this one of the first kind of events like this that you've done, Amy? Or
Well, it's certainly our first feed reel event because it's the initial.
first?
We're so excited to be a part of it. I think, not only is there just a great lineup of presenters, speakers, and wonderful minds, but it's an awesome opportunity to connect with 2.0 pet parents who get it, right? They get it and they want to make better choices and to hear what simple ways that they can improve upon the longevity of their pet. And not only just living longer, but living healthier, right? Living a better quality life. So
Amen.
it's super excited about that. We've done other events like this, and I love these kinds of things because you get to have personal conversations with people. It's not just a huge trade show floor, and
Right.
we right? You get to hear about people's stories, and always we hear these beautiful success stories about how somebody's, the life of their pet took a right turn in a really great and fascinating and fun way because they found it, right? They found real food and good solutions.
Right, and then that made a huge difference. And I think we see that change happen faster with our pets than we do in ourselves. So they prove it to us, and then we can keep doing it too. So uh, Faith has an interesting question about making a bug out bag for your pet. So if you can't cook, in worst case scenario, because if you live in the southeast, and actually I think you've had some remnants of these storms marching up the coast, that's a real
Mhm.
concern. And California wildfires out west, all of that. So have you looked at this issue before and kind of thought about what you might
I
do if you
haven't,
had?
and that's actually my first introduction to the word bug out bag. Never heard it called that before. So, but I mean, it's a really good question. It's not necessarily ideal for every day, but you could certainly dehydrate food ahead of time. So, I mean, this is one of the things that we're actually looking at right now, and maybe a little bit of a spoiler alert, but we have a new product that's coming out that we've actually created a complete and balanced diet, and then we dehydrated it really for just kind of food in a pinch, right? So, and that's that's really wonderful because you can, it's shelf stable. I'm not a huge fan, even of ours. I'm not a huge fan of feeding dry food all the time because I think hydration is so important, um, for many reasons, kidney health, uh, brain cognition, right? And you start to see behavioral disorders when dogs become dehydrated. I know I get moody when I'm, dehydrated, but but air drying or using the like 140 degree temperature setting on a convection oven, so low temperature for several hours to dry out that recipe that you've made, so you can put your ingredients together, maybe in a food processor, form it into something that looks like a small patty, and then put it on a cookie sheet on a in a convection oven at 140 degrees for several hours, and it will dry, and you could use that as a something in a pinch.
Right on. And and I think any type of the freeze dried diets, I'm glad you're coming out with one too, because some of them are not so great, but it's an option. The other
Yep.
thing is that, I mean, we've been traveling for 5 years and stayed in probably, three or 400 Airbnbs, include bus, and I've actually cooked crock-pot diet on a wood stove. So, that's
Yeah.
the kind of
Ah,
thing.
good.
So you can do that kind of stuff as well. But I get it. Like if you're evacuating from a hurricane or something crazy, I would definitely throw that together. Throw some activated charcoal in there. Throw some probiotics in there if you're not already using them on a daily basis, just because of the change in agitation, change in diet in specific, and then agitation from the traveling and stress. It's those are great things to have on hand to help kind of prevent any GI upset, and make sure that you've got like a 15-day supply of any medications that your pet may be on in that bag. I practiced in coastal South Carolina for a lot of years, if you can't tell. So that was an ongoing thing. So make sure you've got all that stuff. If your dog doesn't travel well, make sure you've got something like amazing CBD products to help cool down that anxiety level with the travel. Any meds you might need, any contact information, your microchip number for your pet should the worst case scenario happen. So it's a great question. But it's just, and it's a good thing to be prepared because natural disasters are sad getting any better. So, so yeah. So, any parting comments the that you would want to offer the folks that are listening in about things that you've really seen with your own pups that have made a massive difference?
Sure, sure. Yeah. I mean, my own dogs eat our food, of course, and but they so I'm on pack number 2 now, right? So my pack number 1 that I talked about back in 2007, they've passed on. So, but my pack number 2 has been with me for a little over about 4 years. And I tell you, I have not had a GI issue, an itchy issue. We go to our wonderful holistic vet for checkups, and we get clean bills of health, right? I mean, they don't have weight issues. So the power of real food is amazing. And plant matter, right, is something that sometimes you don't see so much in a lot of recipes, but I love including dark leafy greens and cruciferous vegetables. Nothing starchy, but I find that those things are really helpful for, as long as they're gently cooked or steamed so that they kind of break down. I find that they're really helpful for fighting inflammation, for protecting the lining of the gut. And when you protect the lining of the gut, now you're preventing a whole bunch of problems like that itch. So I would
Right on.
encourage people not to be afraid of green leafy vegetables, because you can put a lot in that bowl and have it only amount to a very small percentage of your calories. Um, so experiment maybe with some of that. Might be kind of fun.
Cool. Well, Amy, thank you so much. For those of you that aren't familiar with Amy's company, goodness gracious, go check it out. We've got the link for you there. She's on Facebook, Instagram, all over the place, like all of us, using stuff. And also, if you haven't checked this out yet, go check out the Feed Real Summit, and we hope to see you in October.
Yes.
So
Yay.
yay.
Until then, thank you.
Yeah, really. Take care. Thanks so much for coming on.